Do you ever get that feeling you're being watched? Not the kind of watch where you catch someone's eyes on you in a crowded room, or the way a security camera follows you at the grocery store. I mean the kind of watch that makes your skin prickle, the kind that makes you check over your shoulder even when you know you're alone. That's how my first night at the Valley View Gas and Go started, and it only got weirder from there. I took the job because I needed the money. That's how these stories always start, right? I just moved back to my hometown after a failed attempt at college and a breakup that left me with more debt than dignity. My mom's friend, Linda, managed the only gas station for 30 miles in any direction, and she said she'd pay me under the table if I could handle the graveyard shift. It's easy, she promised. Just keep the coffee fresh, restock the shelves, and don't let the drunks steal the jerky. She didn't mention the customers who'd come in after midnight, or the way the air outside the station seemed to hum with something I couldn't name. The first night, Linda gave me the tour. The place was a time capsule from the late 90s, faded soda ads, a rack of dusty VHS tapes, and a bathroom key attached to a hubcap. She showed me the panic button under the counter, the ancient security system, and the back room where I could take my breaks. You'll get some weirdos, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But don't worry, most of them are harmless. Just keep your wits about you. I laughed it off, but as soon as she left, the silence pressed in. The only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional rattle of the ice machine outside. I tried to distract myself by stocking the cooler, but every time I glanced at the front windows, I half expected to see someone or something staring back at me. The first customer came in around 12:30. He was tall, thin, and moved like he was made of wire and rubber bands. His clothes were all wrong for the season: heavy coat, gloves, scarf, even though it was a muggy August night. He didn't say a word as he walked the aisles, just picked up a can of motor oil and a pack of gum. When he got to the counter, he stared at me with eyes that were just a little too wide, a little too shiny. I tried to make small talk, but he just nodded, paid an exact change, and left without another word. I told myself he was just a local eccentric. Every small town has a few, but when I watched him walk back to his car, I noticed something strange. He didn't open the door. He just stood by the driver's side, looking up at the sky, his head tilting back farther than seemed possible. Then, in one smooth motion, he slid into the car, actually slid, as if his bones were made of liquid. The car started up, headlights flickering, and he drove off into the night. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. But then the next customer came in. She was a woman, maybe in her 40s, with hair so black it seemed to swallow the light. She wore a dress that looked like it belonged in another century, and her skin was pale as moonlight. She glided, there's no other word for it, up to the counter and asked for a pack of cigarettes. Her voice was soft, almost musical, but there was something off about it, like she was speaking through a filter. When I handed her the cigarettes, her fingers brushed mine, and they were ice cold. She smiled, but her teeth were too sharp, too perfect. "Thank you, dear," she said, and her eyes lingered on me a moment too long. "You're new here, aren't you?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just started tonight." She leaned in, her breath cool against my cheek. "Be careful. Not everyone who comes here is as friendly as I am." She left without paying. I didn't even notice until she was gone. The register was still open, the receipt printer spitting out a blank slip. I looked outside, but she was already gone, vanished into the darkness. The hours crawled by. Every time I thought I could relax, the bell above the door would jingle, and another customer would appear. Some of them looked normal enough: truckers, late-night travelers, a couple of teenagers buying energy drinks. But there was always something just a little off. One guy's shadow didn't match his movements. Another woman's reflection in the cooler glass was a split second behind her. A kid in a hoodie bought a single banana and left it on the counter, staring at me with eyes that were too old for his face. By 3 a.m., I was jumpy, nerves frayed. I tried calling Linda, but my phone had no signal. The landline was dead, too. I told myself it was just a storm, or maybe the old wiring in the building. But the longer the night went on, the more I felt like I was trapped in a fishbowl, with things circling just out of sight. At 3:17, the lights flickered. The hum of the coolers stuttered, and for a moment, the only sound was my own breathing. Then, from outside, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel. I peered through the window, but the parking lot was empty. Still, the footsteps kept coming, closer and closer, until they stopped right outside the door. The bell jingled, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. His eyes were black, bottomless, and when he smiled, it was all wrong. Too wide, too many teeth. He walked up to the counter and placed a single, blood-red coin on the glass. "I need gas," he said, his voice deep and echoing, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I stared at the coin, then at him. How much?" He grinned wider. "All you've got." I tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in my throat. The man's eyes never left mine, and I felt a pressure building behind my forehead, like he was trying to see inside my skull. I reached for the register, hands shaking, and rang up a full tank. The register didn't even recognize the coin he'd given me, but when I dropped it in the drawer, it landed with a heavy, metallic thud that seemed to echo through the whole building. He didn't move, just stood there, waiting, his gaze pinning me in place. I fumbled for words. Pump number?" He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could smell something on his breath, earth, iron, something old and rotten. "You're new," he said, echoing the woman from earlier. "You don't know the rules yet." I swallowed, my mouth dry. "What rules?" He smiled, and for a second, I thought I saw something moving behind his teeth, shadows, or maybe something worse. "You'll learn, or you won't." He straightened, pocketed the coin, and walked out without another word. I watched him go, but when I looked outside, the parking lot was empty again. No car, no man, just the faint outline of footprints in the dust. I tried to steady myself, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, a prank, maybe even a dream. But the coin was still in the register, heavy and cold, and when I touched it, my fingers tingled like I'd stuck them in an electrical socket. The rest of the night passed in a blur. More customers came and went, each stranger than the last. A woman with eyes like headlights who bought every lighter in the store. A man in a suit who never blinked, not once, as he bought a single pack of matches. A child who spoke in a language I'd never heard, her voice echoing off the walls in impossible ways. At 4:12, the power went out completely. The store plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the moon outside. I fumbled for the flashlight under the counter, but when I turned it on, the beam barely cut through the gloom. The shadows seemed to move, writhing along the walls, and I heard whispers, soft, urgent, just at the edge of hearing. I tried to call out, but my voice sounded small, swallowed by the darkness. I thought about leaving, just walking out and never coming back, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the sense that if I left, I'd never make it out alive. Then, from the back room, I heard a noise, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on glass. I crept toward the door, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I had to know. I had to see. The back room was colder than the rest of the store, the air thick and heavy. The tapping grew louder as I approached the supply closet. I reached for the handle, heart pounding, and slowly pulled the door open. Inside, crouched on the floor, was a figure. At first, I thought it was a person, a man, maybe, or a teenager. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw that his skin was gray and mottled, stretched too tight over bones that didn't fit together right. His eyes were huge, black, and unblinking, and his mouth was twisted into a permanent grin. He looked up at me, and the tapping stopped. For a moment, we just stared at each other, frozen. Then he spoke, his voice a dry whisper. "You shouldn't be here." I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. He tilted his head, the grin never fading. "I'm just passing through, like everyone else." He stood, unfolding himself in a way that made my stomach lurch. He was taller than I'd thought, his limbs too long, his fingers ending in sharp, black nails. He stepped past me, his movements jerky and unnatural, and disappeared into the darkness of the store. I stumbled after him, but when I reached the front, he was gone. The only sign he'd ever been there was a faint, oily residue on the floor, and the lingering sense that I'd just seen something I was never meant to see. The power flickered back on at 4:37, the lights buzzing and popping as they came to life. I blinked, disoriented, and looked around. The store was empty. The clock above the counter ticked steadily, as if nothing had happened. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe I'd fallen asleep, dreamed the whole thing. But when I checked the register, the red coin was still there, and the oily footprints led from the back room to the front door. The sun started to rise around 5:30, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I watched it from behind the counter, too tired and too scared to move. When Linda arrived at 6, she found me sitting there, eyes wide, hands shaking. She took one look at me and sighed. "Rough night." I nodded, unable to find the words. She poured me a cup of coffee, her hands steady. "You get used to it," she said. "Or you don't. Either way, you keep the doors open, keep the lights on, and hope the weird ones don't notice you." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I was too tired. Instead, I just drank the coffee and watched the sun climb higher, burning away the last traces of the night. But as I left the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows, waiting for the next time I'd be alone. I tried to sleep when I got home, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces, the two wide eyes, the impossible grins, the shadows that moved on their own. I kept telling myself it was just exhaustion, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with the gas station, the hum of the lights, and the echo of footsteps crunching on gravel. When I woke up, the red coin was in my pocket. I didn't remember taking it. I didn't remember putting it there. But there it was, cold and heavy, pressing against my thigh like a warning. I thought about throwing it away, but something stopped me. Instead, I left it on my nightstand and tried to forget about it. The next night, I almost called Linda to quit. I stared at my phone for a long time, thumb hovering over her number. But I needed the money, and I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. So I went back. The station looked the same as always, faded signs, flickering lights, the smell of burnt coffee and gasoline. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it again. That sense of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. Linda was waiting for me behind the counter. She handed me the keys and gave me a long, searching look. "You sure you're up for this?" I nodded, trying to look braver than I felt. Yeah, I'm fine. She didn't look convinced, but she left without another word. I locked the door behind her and started my shift. The first few hours were quiet. A couple of regulars came in, Old Man Harris, who bought his usual scratch-off tickets and a pack of menthols, and a trucker named Pete, who always left a tip in the jar. For a while, I almost convinced myself that the night before had just been a bad dream. But then, around midnight, the air changed. It got colder, heavier, like a storm was rolling in. The lights flickered, and the hum of the coolers grew louder, almost like they were trying to drown out something else. That's when the girl came in. She couldn't have been more than 10 or 11, with tangled hair and a dress that looked like it had been white once, but was now stained and torn. She walked up to the counter, barefoot, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Can I use your phone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. There was something about her that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't just turn her away. I handed her the cordless phone from behind the counter. She dialed a number, her fingers moving too quickly, too precisely. She held the phone to her ear, but I never heard it ring. She just stood there, listening, her face blank. After a minute, she handed the phone back. "Thank you," she said, and turned to leave. "Wait," I called after her. "Do you need help? Should I call someone for you?" She stopped in the doorway, her back to me. "They're coming," she said. "You should leave." Before I could say anything else, she was gone. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the empty doorway. I wanted to run after her, but my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I locked the door and tried to steady my breathing. The next hour passed in a haze. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see the girl staring back at me. But the parking lot stayed empty, the only movement the flicker of moths around the lights. At 1:37, the bell above the door jingled, even though I knew I'd locked it. I looked up, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, thin, with skin so pale it almost glowed. His eyes were black, bottomless, and when he smiled, I saw rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. He walked up to the counter, his movements smooth and silent. "You have something of mine," he said, his voice low and cold. I didn't know what to say. My mind raced, trying to remember if I'd seen him before, if he was one of the customers from the night before. But I couldn't place him. He leaned in, his face inches from mine. "The coin," he whispered. "Give it to me." I reached into my pocket, but the coin wasn't there. Panic flared in my chest. I checked my other pockets, the counter, the floor, but it was gone. He watched me, his smile never fading. "You can't get rid of it," he said. "It's yours now." He turned and walked out, the bell jingling behind him. I ran to the door, but when I looked outside, the parking lot was empty. I locked the door again, double-checking the bolt. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the keys. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I kept expecting the man to come back, or the girl, or something worse. But the hours crawled by, and the only customers were a couple of truckers and a woman who bought a single bottle of water and left without saying a word. When the sun finally rose, I felt like I'd aged a decade. Linda showed up right on time, her face drawn and tired. "Another rough night?" she asked. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She poured me a cup of coffee and sat down across from me. "You're not the first," she said quietly. "This place, it does things to people. Shows them things they're not supposed to see." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I was too tired. Instead, I just drank my coffee and watched the sun climb higher, burning away the last traces of the night. But as I left the station, I felt the weight of the coin in my pocket again, cold and heavy, pressing against my skin like a promise. I spent the day in a fog, the coin's weight a constant reminder that something was wrong. I tried to go about my routine, laundry, dishes, scrolling through my phone, but nothing felt real. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too long, every sound a little too sharp. I kept checking my pocket, half hoping the coin would vanish, but it was always there, cold and unyielding. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, I sat on my porch and watched the sky turn from gold to indigo. I thought about calling Linda, about quitting for good, but the words stuck in my throat. I needed answers, not just for myself, but for whatever it was that had latched onto me. I decided to go in early, hoping to catch Linda before her shift ended. When I arrived, the station was empty except for her. She was restocking the shelves, humming a tune I didn't recognize. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes tired but kind. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" she said, forcing a smile. I hesitated, then pulled the coin from my pocket and set it on the counter. "What is this, Linda? Why does it feel like it's following me?" She stared at the coin for a long moment, her face unreadable. Finally, she sighed and motioned for me to sit. "Have you ever heard the stories about this place?" she asked. I shook my head. "Just the usual ghosts, weirdos, the kind of stuff people make up to scare each other." She nodded. "Some of it's true, some of it's worse. This station's been here longer than the town, longer than the road, even. My granddad used to say it was built on a crossroads, a place where things meet. Not just people, other things." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "What kind of things?" She shrugged, her gaze distant. "Things that don't belong. Things that pass through, looking for something or someone. The coin, it's a marker. Means you've been noticed." I stared at the coin, the metal catching the harsh fluorescent light. "Noticed by what?" Linda shook her head. "Doesn't matter. What matters is you keep your head down, do your job, and don't ask too many questions. Most of them just want to be left alone. But if you start poking around, if you start looking for answers, they'll notice you even more." I wanted to argue, to demand more, but the look in her eyes stopped me. She'd seen things, too, maybe worse than what I'd seen. She stood, her hands trembling just a little. "You want to quit, I'll understand. But if you stay, you need to accept that some nights, you'll see things you can't explain. And you'll have to live with that." I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me like a blanket. "I'll stay. For now." She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You're braver than most." The rest of the shift passed quietly. Linda left at midnight, and I was alone again. The hours dragged, each minute stretching longer than the last. I tried to keep busy, stocking shelves, cleaning the coffee machine, counting inventory, but my mind kept drifting back to the coin, to the things I'd seen. At 2:11, the bell above the door jingled. I looked up, expecting another strange customer, but it was just Pete, the trucker. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot. "Rough night?" I asked, forcing a smile. He nodded, grabbing a coffee. "You could say that. Saw something weird on the road. Thought I was seeing things." I hesitated. "What did you see?" He shrugged, staring into his cup. "Looked like a person, but wrong. Too tall, arms too long. Just standing by the side of the road, watching. Gave me the creeps." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Did it do anything?" He shook his head. "Just watched." I didn't stop to find out more. He paid for his coffee and left, the bell jingling behind him. I watched him drive off, headlights cutting through the darkness. The rest of the night was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, just out of sight. Every time the wind rattled the windows, I jumped. Every time the lights flickered, my heart raced. At 4:03, the girl from the night before appeared at the window. She didn't come inside, just stood there, her face pale in the glow of the lights. I walked to the door, but when I opened it, she was gone. In her place, on the ground, was a small, white stone. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It was smooth, almost warm, and etched with a symbol I didn't recognize. I slipped it into my pocket, next to the coin, and closed the door. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. When Linda arrived, I showed her the stone. She studied it, her brow furrowed. "Keep it," she said finally. "Might come in handy." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but she was already busy with the register, counting out the till. I left the station, the coin and the stone heavy in my pocket. I didn't know what they meant or what was coming next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone anymore. Something had noticed me, and it wasn't going to let go. The days started to blur together. I'd sleep fitfully during the daylight, haunted by dreams of the gas station and the things that came in after midnight. At night, I'd drive out to Valley View, the coin and the stone always in my pocket, like talismans or curses. I couldn't decide which. I stopped trying to explain it all away. The weirdness was real, and it was getting harder to ignore. On my fourth night, the air felt different as soon as I stepped inside. The lights buzzed louder, the shadows seemed to pool in the corners, and the air was thick with the scent of rain, even though the sky was clear. I checked the security cameras, but the screens flickered with static, showing only brief, warped glimpses of the parking lot. I tried to focus on my tasks, but my hands shook as I stocked the shelves. At 12:45, the bell above the door rang, and a man walked in. He wore a suit that looked expensive, but it was covered in dust, and his shoes were caked with mud. He moved with a strange, jerky grace, like a puppet on invisible strings. He didn't look at me as he wandered the aisles, picking up a bottle of water and a pack of gum. When he finally came to the counter, he set the items down and stared at me with eyes that were too bright, too blue. "You're the new one," he said, his voice flat and echoing. "You have the coin." I didn't answer, but my hand went instinctively to my pocket. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You should be careful with gifts. They always come with a price." I tried to keep my voice steady. "What do you want?" He leaned in, his face inches from mine. "To warn you. The others, they're watching. They want to see what you'll do." I swallowed hard. "What happens if I give the coin back?" He shook his head. "It doesn't work like that. Once you're marked, you're part of the game." He paid with a bill that felt too crisp, too new, and left without another word. I watched him go, but when I looked outside, he was gone. No car, no footprints, just the lingering scent of rain. The rest of the night was a parade of oddities. A woman with hair like silver thread who bought a single rose from the display by the register. A man in a faded army jacket who asked for directions to a town that didn't exist. A pair of twins who spoke in unison, their voices weaving together in a way that made my skin crawl. At 2:30, the girl appeared again, this time inside the store. She stood by the coffee machine, staring at the selection of creamers like she was trying to solve a puzzle. I approached her slowly. "Are you okay?" She looked up, her eyes wide and ancient. "They're coming tonight," she whispered. "You need to be ready." I knelt down to her level, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Who's coming?" She shook her head. "The ones who don't belong. The ones who want the coin." I glanced around, suddenly aware of how empty the store felt. "What do I do?" She pressed something into my hand, a small, folded piece of paper. "When the time comes, use this, but only if you have to." Before I could ask her anything else, she slipped out the door and vanished into the night. I unfolded the paper. Inside was a symbol drawn in shaky black ink. It looked like a circle with 3 lines radiating from the center, almost like a sun. I traced it with my finger, feeling a strange warmth pulse through my skin. The hours crawled by. Every sound seemed amplified: the hum of the lights, the ticking of the clock, the distant howl of a coyote. I kept the paper close, my hand never far from the coin and the stone. At 3:33, the lights flickered and died. The store was plunged into darkness, the only illumination coming from the moon outside. I grabbed the flashlight, but the beam was weak, barely cutting through the gloom. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl, coming from somewhere near the back room. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I forced myself to move, step by trembling step. As I reached the back room, the growling grew louder, more insistent. I pushed the door open and shone the flashlight inside. Something was crouched in the corner, its body twisted and wrong, all elbows and knees and too many joints. Its eyes glowed in the beam of the flashlight, and its mouth was full of jagged, broken teeth. It lunged at me, moving faster than anything should. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut just as it crashed against the wood. The whole building seemed to shake with the force of it. I fumbled for the paper, the coin, the stone, anything that might help. My mind raced, trying to remember the symbol, the warmth I'd felt when I traced it. I pressed the paper to the door and whispered the only word that came to mind. Stop. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the growling faded. The pressure against the door eased, and the air grew still. I waited, heart pounding, until I was sure it was gone. Then I collapsed to the floor, shaking, the paper still clutched in my hand. The lights flickered back on at 4:17. The store was empty, the only sign of what had happened a deep scratch in the wood of the backroom door. When Linda arrived at sunrise, I showed her the scratch, the paper, the coin, and the stone. She just nodded, her face pale. "You're in it now," she said quietly. "Whatever it is, it's not done with you." I didn't sleep at all that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing in the back room. Its twisted limbs, its glowing eyes, the way it moved like it was made of smoke and bone. I kept replaying the moment I pressed the paper to the door, the way the symbol seemed to pulse with heat, the way the growling faded as if something had pulled the creature away. I wanted to believe it was over, that I'd survived the worst of it, but deep down I knew better. The coin, the stone, the paper, they were all pieces of a puzzle I didn't understand, and the game was still being played. That evening, I sat on my porch, the coin and the stone in my hand, the paper folded neatly in my pocket. The sky was bruised purple, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I thought about calling Linda, about asking her to explain everything, but I knew she'd just give me that same tired look, the one that said some things were better left unspoken. I drove to the station early, the road empty except for the occasional pair of headlights in the distance. The gas station looked the same as always, faded signs, flickering lights, the hum of the coolers, but I felt different. I felt marked, changed, like I was carrying something inside me that didn't belong. Linda was waiting for me, her face drawn and pale. She handed me the keys and lingered by the door. "You sure you want to keep doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I don't think I have a choice anymore." She gave me a sad smile. "None of us do." She left, and I locked the door behind her. The night was quiet at first. A few regulars came in, Old Man Harris, Pete the trucker, a couple of teenagers buying snacks. For a while, I almost convinced myself that things were back to normal. But then, just after midnight, the air changed. The lights flickered, the The shadows deepened, and the hum of the coolers grew louder, almost like a warning. I kept my hand on the coin in my pocket, the stone warm against my palm. At 12:33, the bell above the door jingled, and a woman walked in. She was tall, with long black hair and eyes that seemed to swallow the light. She wore a dress that shimmered like oil, and her smile was sharp as broken glass. She walked up to the counter, her movements smooth and deliberate. "You're the one with the coin," she said, her voice low and musical. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She leaned in, her eyes boring into mine. "You've seen them, haven't you? The ones who come after midnight." I swallowed hard. "What are they?" She smiled, a slow, predatory smile. "Travelers. Lost things. Some are just passing through. Others, they're looking for something. Or someone." She reached out, her fingers brushing mine. Her touch was cold, electric. "Be careful. The coin is a key, but it's also a lock. It can open doors, but it can also keep things out. Or in." She let go, her eyes lingering on mine. "If they offer you a trade, don't take it, no matter what they promise." She turned and walked out, the bell jingling softly behind her. I watched her go, my heart pounding. The rest of the night was a blur of strange faces and stranger requests. A man with no shadow bought a map and asked for directions to a place I'd never heard of. A woman with eyes like mirrors bought a single rose and left without a word. A child with a voice like wind asked for a glass of water, then vanished before I could pour it. At 2:22, the girl appeared again, standing by the coffee machine. She looked tired, her dress even more tattered than before. "They're coming," she whispered. "Tonight's the night." I knelt down beside her, the coin and the stone heavy in my pocket. "What do I do?" She pressed her hand to mine, her skin cold and dry. "When they come, you have to choose. The coin or the stone. One will save you. The other will trap you here forever." I stared at her, panic rising in my chest. "How do I know which is which?" She shook her head, her eyes sad. "You don't. That's the game." She slipped away before I could ask anything else, leaving me alone with my fear. The hours crawled by, each minute heavier than the last. I kept the coin and the stone in my hands, turning them over and over, searching for some clue, some sign. But they were just objects, cold, silent, waiting. At 3:33, the lights died. The store was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the moon outside. I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the aisles. A figure appeared at the end of the aisle, tall and thin, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It moved toward me, its movements smooth and unnatural. "You have something that belongs to us," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. I held up the coin and the stone, my hands shaking. "Which one do you want?" It smiled, a terrible, hungry smile. "Choose." My breath caught. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of both objects, and trusted my gut. I pressed the stone into the creature's outstretched hand. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the air shimmered, the shadows recoiled, and the thing vanished, taking the stone with it. The lights flickered back on. I was alone, the coin still in my palm, and I knew the night shift had only just begun.